The wind tastes of iron here. It combs the grass in long green sighs, licks the stones until they glisten like black teeth under a bruised sky. Tourists chatter. Cameras click like insects. They call it a monument, a calendar, a clock for a people too blind to know the time without a sundial of giants. But step closer, touch the cold, listen. The stones hum, not with sound your ears can leash, but with a low, obscene murmur coiling in the marrow of your bones, as if the granite remembers the weight of voices fat with syllables older than language, the rasp of chants braided in ratios no tongue now speaks. They call it Stonehenge, the henge of stones, the circle crouched in the green throat of Wiltshire like a fossilized jaw. They draw it on postcards. They drape it in myths fat, with druids and knives of mist. But the truth squats deeper. It reeks of geometry, of intent soldered into rock by hands that hummed in harmony with the spine of the world. What is this place? A temple? A tomb? A calendar to leash the sun in its seasonal rounds? The textbooks croon their lullaby. Yes, a clock, a wheel of worship. Farmers craning their necks for the solstice sun, praying for crops fat with rain. But that story is too neat, too small for the stones that grin like titans frozen mid-laugh. Look at them. The Sarsens claw the sky like ribs ripped from a god's carcass. The lintels grin in jaws of mortise and tenon, their tongues of stone locked so tight they've weathered 4,000 years of storm and frost. You think peasants carved this? You think hands raw from pulling nettles shaped these teeth with tools of flint? Number. The lie gapes like a wound, because this circle is not a clock, it is a code. The circle whispers in the ratios of its bones, the span of its arcs, the tilt of its spines, angles that echo in the throats of pyramids, in ziggurats drowned in desert sand, in temples that claw the sky in jungles thick with rot. Why does the pattern sprawl across continents like veins in a single skin? Why do the stones hum the same ratios you hear in the pulse of planets, in the hiss of orbits, in the snarled lace of galaxies? Because Stonehenge did not measure time. It measured something deeper, something the architects of now cannot name without tasting blood. The wind moans between the stones like breath through a broken flute. The tourists shiver, mutter, shuffle back to their buses fat with glass and chrome. But the henge squats in the dusk, patient as bone. It knows the hum will swell again. It knows the sky will split its ribs and the ratios will sing like wolves in heat. And when they do, the stones will not whisper, they will roar. They call it a calendar. The stones crouched like ribs gnawed by 4,000 winters, the lintels grinning like fossilized jaws. A circle tuned to the pulse of the sun, a wheel to leash the seasons for farmers too blind to feel the sky in their blood. It sounds neat, it sounds reasonable, and it is a lie. Yes, the stones drink the solstice light. Yes, their throats gape to swallow the dawn on the longest day, to spit the dusk on the shortest. Yes, they hum with lunar ratios, with cycles fat with silver, the 18.6-year nodal dance of the moon, the suzerain of eclipses, sliding like knives through centuries. But ask yourself, who needs this? Peasants scabbed with frost? Farmers sniffing rain like wolves sniff rot? You do not need a cathedral of Sarsens to know when to sow. You do not split the spine of hills, haul stones heavier than whales across marsh and moor, mortise them with tongues so tight they laugh at frost and time just to count sunsets. Number. This is not a clock. This is a code inked in stone. And the ratios curled in its ribs are not for crops. They are for cosmos. Walk the arc with a compass in your palm. with the numbers hissing in your skull like bees. The outer circle hums the solar year, 365.25 days, etched in gaps and spines that grin at the throat of the horizon. Step inward, and the stones snarl in fractions alignments for lunar standstills, for eclipses bleeding their knives across the sky. The 56 Aubrey holes mutter in their dust. A cycle of 18 years, eclipses inked in the black marrow of the moon's dance. The trilithon's five-fanged gates yawning to drink the dawn of solstice and belch it back at dusk. This is precision fat with intent, a machine of ratios tuned not just to track the breath of light, but to hum in resonance with the sky's deep bones. Imagine the hands that birthed it, not peasants squatting in mud, but mathematicians in skins of fur, priests with eyes fat with stars, their skulls echoing with numbers so pure they scald the tongue of time. But even that is a shadow of truth, because Stonehenge does not stop at tracking. The wheel does not watch, it speaks. What if the alignments are not measurements, but keys? What if the solstice sun is not a signal to sow, but a syllable in a sentence etched in stone to split the sky? You stand in the circle at dawn, the frost crackling under your boots like old bones. The sun climbs, the stones catch its blood and fling it through their jaws in arcs fat with ratios. Light lashes shadow into shapes that slither across the grass like glyphs. Is this farming or invocation? The textbooks purse their lips and hiss. Coincidence, primitives playing with rocks. But the hum curls louder in the granite. It smells of algorithm, of architecture braided with astronomy, with acoustics, with something older than prayer and rawer than math. The wheel does not measure time. It bends it, not in spans your clocks can leash, but in tremors of frequency, in whispers inked in the bones of gravity itself. And if it bends time, what else does it bend? Stand in the circle, when the mist fattens like milk, when the stones loom like ribs of some fossilized god, their flanks slick with dew, their jaws locked in arcs that smell of design. At first glance, chaos, monoliths scattered like bones across a green jaw. But walk slow. Count. Trace the tilt of shadows when dawn combs their spines. Feel the ratios twitch in the marrow of your skull. Because nothing here is chance. The outer ring hisses in numbers that mock accident. 30 sarsens a wheel grinning in a sequence tuned to the solar pulse. Inside it, the 5 trilithons bloom like black teeth, each jaw yawning toward a gate of light when the solstice splits the sky. The axis of the henge is no guess. It cleaves the horizon with surgical hunger, snaring the sun at its longest breath, the moon at its most obscene lean. The circle hums the year, the ellipse whispers the tilt, the holes mutter in fractions fat with prophecy. 18.6 years, 56 steps in the dance of eclipses. This is not folk art. It is a map etched in bone and stone, a symphony braided in ratios that echo from the lattice of atoms to the spit of galaxies. Look at the spacing, not equal, never equal. Intervals curled in patterns that flirt with a golden mean, that gnaw at pi like wolves at a throat, that purr in sequences Fibonacci would taste millennia later. Measure the arcs. Feel them hum against the ratios inked in your flesh, the span of your arms, the rhythm of your breath, the drumbeat of your veins. Because this geometry does not live in stone alone. It lives in you. Why these proportions? Because they are not human. They are universal. The same ribs you see in the shells of Nautilus, in the whirl of storms, in the spiral of galaxies gulping the black milk of space. Stonehenge is not a monument. It is a mirror, a circle cut to echo the throat of creation, to hum in harmony with the deep code fattening in the marrow of the real. And then the whispers of sound. Clap once between the stones and hear the echo shiver like a trapped bird. Low tones swell, curl, braid in loops that lick your bones. The air here does not simply carry sound, it fattens it, twists it, coils it back on itself like a serpent eating its tail. Stonehenge is not mute. It sings, or it did. The geometry does not only snare light, it tunes vibration. It is an ear pressed to the pulse of the earth, a mouth spitting syllables no throat of flesh can shape. Ask yourself, why braid astronomy with acoustics? Why lace ratios of light with ribs that purr when struck? Because this is not architecture. It is an instrument, a device fat with intent, not to count days, to bend them, not to measure the hum of the world, to feed it back, sharpened, tuned to a pitch that can slit the veil between what is and what waits. Stand in the heart of the wheel at dusk. Whisper. Feel your voice split like glass. The echo does not return. It climbs up the spine of air, up through the ribs of sky, towards something listening. Maps lie until you peel them. Strip the ink. Ignore the borders, the flags, the lines fat with politics. Trace only the bones, the old stones, the henges, the pyramids crouched like predators under the yellow hiss of desert suns. And then the pattern fattens in the dark like a bruise. Draw a line from Stonehenge east. The chalk downs hum under your feet, but the thread slithers on through Avebury's ring like a jaw of broken teeth, through the claws of Carnac stone stabbing the Breton fog, through the Alps where dolmens rot in the ribs of ice. Keep pulling. Your line snarls in the throat of Baalbek, licks the cracked lips of Giza, purrs in the bones of Göbekli Tepe, and vanishes in deserts fat with teeth of granite no map dares name. Now draw the others. North to Kallanish, where stones lean like wolves in the fog. West to the serpent mounds coiled in the wet breath of Ohio. South to the jaws of Tiwanaku. To the sun gates gnawing at the Bolivian sky. The lines hiss. They braid. They bloom into a grid fat as a spider's dream, a net strangling the planet in threads of geometry too taut for chance. We call them ley lines, but that name is a coffin. It hides the hum, because the grid is not myth. It purrs in measurements no eye can eat, in alignments gnawing the bone of longitude, in triangles fat with ratios that echo the pulse of stars. Stonehenge is not a circle. It is a node, a knot soldered into a lattice sprawling from pole to pole, tuned to the pitch of Earth's black heart. What does the grid drink? Energy. Not the tame fat hum of wires, but the raw milk gushing from the marrow of the planet, telluric currents, sluicing through stone and soil like serpents drunk on fire. The ancients knew the veins. They pressed their stones where the blood boiled loudest, where the earth moaned under its own weight. Stonehenge squats on one of those throats, a place where currents kiss, where forces hiss in coils fat with static and hunger. The circle does not just watch the sky. It hums with the belly of the world. It drinks, and maybe it sings back. Imagine the planet as a board, not of wood, of math. A sphere combed in arcs of light and force. Its bones inked in geometry. Its skin tattooed with nodes gnawing at ratios no priest dares name. The henges, the pyramids, the ziggurats, and the towers drowned in mud, they are not relics. They are teeth, plugs, sockets in a machine so old the rust has eaten its hymns. And if the grid was whole, if the hum braided tight again, what would wake? Modern science coughs when you whisper this. They call it fantasy. Coincidence swollen with human greed for pattern. But ask why their satellites keep mapping anomalies in the black belly of the crust. Ask why airfields fatten on nodes where myths hiss of power places. Ask why they build particle throats on the scars of old stones. Because the grid never died. It only sleeps, and the hands that salted its roots still pluck its threads in the dark. Stonehenge is not alone. It is a word in a sentence too vast for a single tongue. A syllable in a song that once combed the sky, that braided earth to the cold blue veins of the stars. You think it's a ruin? It's a lock, and maybe the key is already turning. Strike the stones, not with a hammer, but with the flat of your palm, with the hiss of your voice uncoiled in chant. Listen, the air swells, the granite groans. A note blooms in the marrow of the circle, thick as honey, low as a god's last breath. Stonehenge is not mute. It sings. Modern mouths sneer. They call it coincidence, the acoustics of chance, but the hum shrugs off their words like rain. Because this wheel of stone was tuned, each monolith a string, each lintel a bridge fat with ratios that braid sound into force. Run the tests. They did. Archaeologists, physicists, ears fat with machines that taste frequencies humans cannot tongue, and the stones spat their secrets, pitch in ranges that claw the gut, tones that twist the air into ropes you feel in your bones, vibrations thick enough to slow your pulse or whip it into a fever. The circle is an amplifier, not for music, for magic in its oldest mask, vibration. Sound is not art, it is architecture. It gnaws matter, hums it into shapes. It curls sand into glyphs, splits stone with whispers fattened to a scream. The ancients knew. They sang walls into place, slid blocks as fat as whales across plains, slick with resonance. They tongued the ratios that taught matter to melt, to flow, to kneel. And Stonehenge is a fossil of that, knowing a machine braided from granite, a throat-swallowing sound and vomiting force. But force for what? Not for bricks, not for grain, for minds. Step into the circle when the night squats heavy on the downs, when the sky hangs like a black lung fat with stars. Chant. Let the note purr through your ribs. The hum fattens. It licks your skull. It chews your thoughts into static, until the edges of you slur, until the bars of bone feel thin as breath. This is not prayer. It is engineering of consciousness, a key of sound, twisting the lock of perception, cracking the skull of the real to let the light leak through. What happens when sound couples with stone and sky? When the ratios inked in the arcs braid with frequencies that gnaw the gates of your brain? Maybe nothing, maybe trance, maybe more. The myths mutter of druids, of circles thick with smoke and blood, of chants that slit the night like knives. They call them rites, but rites are rituals, and rituals are protocols. The henge was not a temple, it was a device, and its code was frequency. Ask the engineers of now. They stripped the hum from the earth, played it in wires, spit it into towers that lick the sky. They know the truth your priests swallowed in ash. Frequency bends flesh. Coil's thought gnaws the weave of space if you pluck the right note hard enough. Stonehenge knew that song, and maybe it sang not for men, but for what crouched behind the veil, waiting for the pitch that splits the dark. Stand in the center. Feel the breath of the stones on your skin, cold as iron, soft as the paw of time. Tilt your head back. The sky yawns wide, a black lung stippled with fire. Those point suns, fat with heat, bloated with secrets. They watch, always have. And here, in this ring of ribs, you are the axis. You are the thread. You are the offering. The myths croon their lullabies. Druids, solstice rites, a clock for peasants pawing mud in awe of the sun. But myths molt. Strip the skins, and the bones grin through. A geometry braided with ratios that echo galaxies. An architecture tuned to the hiss of orbits. A throat cut to drink the sun on the longest day. To spit it out on the shortest. To catch the moon when it writhes in its nodal fever every 18 years. Why? Not for wheat, not for sheep, for alignment. The circle is a lock. Light is the key. When the sun slits the dawn at solstice, its blade cleaves the gate between trilithons. The shadow rise in arcs that gnaw the earth like black serpents, etching glyphs in frost that bloom for a breath, then rot to nothing. You think that is art. It is code. And the code does not whisper to eyes. It whispers to forces coiled outside the skin of the real. Now lace sound through light. Stonehenge is not mute. Its stones hum when tongued by wind, when kissed by chant. Resonance ripples in waves fat with hunger, climbing the spine of air, gnawing the veil between here and not here. This is not worship. It is engineering, not faith frequency. A syntax of light and vibration, braided in arcs of granite, plated with the pulse of earth itself, to crack a seam in the loom of the world. The old texts hiss of doors. The Rig Veda croons of gates gaping for gods. The Norse carved whispers of Bifrost, a bridge fat with color, arching between the marrow of man and the maw of the stars. Even the Book of Enoch mutters of watchers sliding down ladders of fire, their jaws slick with sin. What if these were not metaphors? What if they were blueprints disguised in myth so the architects could laugh in the ash of your ignorance? Imagine the ritual. Not robed fools pawing antlers in fog, but technicians in skins of fur. Priests fat with math. The solstice sun knifing the gate. The chant curling in the stones like smoke. The hum swelling until the air splits, until the marrow of the world groans, until the black glass between what is and what waits fractures like ice under a wolf's paw. And something leans through. What? Gods? Ghosts? Your own reflection inked in a geometry so raw it peels your skull? The myths do not say, or they lie. Maybe the ones who walked out were not the ones who walked in. Maybe the latter is a noose for those too blind to see the wheel's teeth. Stonehenge is not a ruin. It is a scar, a seam where the loom once split, where fingers inked in starlight pawed the throat of earth. You call it dead, but scars itch, scars remember, and this one hums still, waiting for the hand that will pluck the thread and tear the fabric wide again. History doesn't hide the stones. It hides their hum. You can touch them. You can buy a ticket. Press your palm to granite slick with rain and time. You can take a picture, a selfie fat with fog and myth. Post it with hashtags bleeding wonder. Stonehenge squats in plain sight, but its throat is gagged with stories smooth as glass. A calendar, a temple to the sun, a druidic altar for rites of smoke and blood. Convenient lies, soft lies, lies fat with comfort, because the truth burns holes too wide in the map. Ask yourself, who first wrote these lies? Not the stones. They mutter ratios, not romance. It was the scholars, the priests in new masks, those who draped science in cassocks of reason, those who crowned themselves wardens of the real. They fed you a story of peasants pawing mud, stacking stones for worship, for wheat, for fear of the dark, because to admit the hum, to admit the grid, is to crack the spine of history, to confess that the past is not a gutter crawling toward your shining now, but a mirror fat with ghosts laughing at your ignorance. So they amputated the truth. They salted the roots with words like primitive, superstition, ritual. They dressed the wound with theories neat as stitches. Stonehenge is an agricultural tool, a communal clock, proof of early man's awe before the sky. And you swallowed it because awe is safe. Awe does not reboot the lattice. Awe does not split the bars of your bone cage. Why erase? Because the code is cancer for any system that fattens on chains. A society that hums in ratios, that tongues the seams of the real with sound and stone, that climbs ladders of light cannot be leashed. It does not kneel to kings. It does not rot for coin. It does not fatten priests. So they burn the books. They drown the glyphs. They caged the stones in myths and tickets and fences fat with wire. They told you the henge was dead, a fossil, a folly, a relic drunk on moss and frost. But fossils still hum, and lies rot slow. Even now, the hands in glass towers know. They build their machines in circles of steel, their colliders yawning like cyclopean mouths under Swiss stone. They plat frequencies in throats of metal that purr like the henge once purred under solstice sun. They tell you it is physics, research, progress, but the ratios grinning in their blueprints are the same bones inked in the Wiltshire chalk, the same hum stitched in the stones fat with rain. What they erased from history, they resurrect in code, because control is never silence. It is monopoly on the song. Stonehenge is not mute. It never was. It whispers in the ratios of its ribs, in the echo that shivers when the wind tongues its jaws. And the ones who caged it know, if the world hears the old hymn again, the wheel splits, the bars break, and the architects of now bleed into dust. Stonehenge crouches like a scar, a wound stitched in chalk. Its stitches fat with granite, its lips cracked by frost and time. Tourists tramp its ribs, cameras blink, guides croon the lullaby of ritual and calendar, a song smooth as milk, poured into ears fat with sleep. But scars itch, scars remember, and this one hums still. Run your fingers along its arcs, feel the ratios coil under the moss, the numbers purring in the cold grain of stone like worms in bone. The hum is faint, gagged by centuries of silence, but not dead, because patterns do not die. They molt, they shed their skins of stone, crawl into circuits of glass, slither into the ribs of machines fat with code and fire. Look at the world now. Our towers fang the sky in spirals of steel, their bones inked in the same ratios that grin through the henge. We lace the earth in wires fat with current, pave it with grids that hum in frequencies we cannot tongue. We sink throats of metal into the black lungs of mountains, colliders yawning like cyclopean mouths, plucking particles from the marrow of the real like priests, tonguing the syllables of God. We think this is progress, but it is echo, a refrain fat with teeth, looping through the throat of time. Stonehenge sings in concrete now, in code, in the howl of data sluicing through glass veins. And the sky? We spear it with satellites, tiny eyes, fat with hunger, crawling in chains across the black etching lattices that mirror the old grid. A net flung not in moss and stone, but in light and orbit, a leash braided in algorithms. The pattern breathes. It hums under your feet, over your head, in the cold blue meat of your machines. And like before, it is tuning. What happens when the hum swells? When the ratios lock again? When light and sound braid in frequencies fat with intent? We call it science. They called it worship. Both are masks on the same skull. Control of the loom, the tearing of the veil, the opening of the throat, between what is and what waits. And something waits, always has. You think Stonehenge is a ruin. It is rehearsal, a fossil humming the hymn of a cycle that fattens again in circuits and steel. We have built new henges of glass, of particle fire, of satellites threading the night in chains of light. We chant in code now, in equations thick with zeros, but the song is the same. The old hymn, the one that split the world once, still curls in our wires like smoke. Maybe that is why the myths hiss warnings wrapped in sugar. Hubris, pride, flood and fire for those who claw the sky. But those were not parables. They were protocols, reset codes inked in blood. Because the loom does not like snarls, and every time the song swells too loud, the shears flash. Look around. Hear the hum under the roar of your cities, under the static of your screens. Feel the itch in the bones of the world. The pattern is waking. The wheel is grinding. And when it locks, Stonehenge will not roar alone. The whole grid will sing and the song will split the bars of your cage. Not warning, invitation. The same seduction whispered in moss and frost 4,000 years ago. Open the gate. Call the light. Begin again.